My name is Jennifer DeMarco, and this is Class 6 in the Forge It Web Series workshop. Today, we are working on our second class in our second week. This whole week focuses on the images, the pictures that will create your story, a solid story that evokes emotion. The types of things we're going to be talking about today are camera techniques, or to simplify, I like to call them angles. Now, this doesn't just mean obtuse, acute, left, right, things like that. This means the angle you're taking to approach the scene. Fades, tracks, tilts, cuts, zooms, pans, how to use a tripod, what kind of tripod you need, transitions that happen in post-production. I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these things, and then I'm going to attempt to take the camera in hand and actually show them to you. So wish me luck. The angle that you take to approach a single shot in an overall scene will affect the emotional impact of that shot. Different angles, different approaches, have different impacts on the viewer. For instance, a pan. A pan can be horizontal or vertical in direction. It is a slow motion that shows us the relation between objects and is often used to bring us to one particular spot where the viewer can then focus. A fade. A fade happens when one image dissolves or fades into another. This can show movement between scenes, or it can show us a change in environment. A tracking shot is when you follow the motion of something else. For instance, if I had a person moving toward me right now, this would be considered a tracking shot. Also, if I were moving beside them and following them. A zoom should always be done slowly, and it can either be done outward, to go from a close view to a wider view, or a zoom in, to go from a wider view to a more detailed one. Cuts are more abrupt. They move without transition from one image to another image or view to another, with no transition between the changes. To utilize tilt means that you're shooting a scene or image from an angle other than straight on. You can tilt from below, from an extreme side angle, or from high above. Each of these approaches, each of these angles, gives your viewer a different atmosphere. It creates a different feeling when they're watching. If you're shooting something from a very low tilt up, then everything, the whole world seems to tower above the viewer. If you're shooting everything from high above, it's almost as if you're lifted above the scene, removed from it. Tracks tend to be action shots. Fades tend to be more gentle, artistic. Zooms, when done well, are almost undetectable. A lot of us don't notice how often zoom is used in our favorite shows. Some of the other things that are very important to wrap your mind around is that your cuts create fast action. You can snap back and forth between two people speaking. You don't have to just have them standing there, static, speaking to each other, both shown. You can go from extreme shot to extreme shot. You can show facial expressions. You can show, it's actually incredible what you can show. You could show, you could be more surrealistic, show an eye, the twitch of a grimace, of the clenching of a fist, snapping back and forth with quick cuts. It's a lot more work in the editing process, but it can create an incredibly dynamic scene. With our pans, again, try to keep them slow so that they don't become blurry and you lose your viewer. But with your pans, your most important thing that you're doing there is establishing the relationship between objects, characters, people. You're setting the scene. Sometimes people do pans and then, which are closer up, and then snap to a wider establishing shot, which means usually a wide angle shot of the entire scene. So we know where we are and we've seen some exciting details. Now, you might notice that I have two other things written on here, tripod and transitions. Now, you can get all of these things using just your body holding the camera. However, there are a couple of things that are going to make it easier to capture all 6 of these approaches, these angles. Now, what I utilize is actually a pretty old school, it was purchased in the 1980s, a tripod, but it's heavy duty, which means it's heavy. I didn't go for light. And it has both a pan and tilt head. Don't bother purchasing a tripod if it does not have a pan and tilt head. Pan, that means it rotates left to right. Tilt, it also rotates up and down. Now, of course, most of us, when we think of a tripod, we think of something that simply brings the camera up. Well, of course, that's very important too. Now, I personally like to have a very wide range. An 8-foot rise is really nice because then you can get those very nice from above angled shots, the tilt shots from above. But nowadays, I would say you could drop anywhere between $100 and $300 on a decent tripod, but it is one of those things as important as your camera. You don't want to have everything be handheld unless that's the look you're going for. Now, for instance, Ghost Sniffers is shot almost entirely handheld, so there's always slight movements. But other projects that we're doing, such as the one that I mentioned that I'm cast in, that will be entirely on a tripod. That creates a stiller image that is more controlled. It really depends artistically on what you want and what your genre will support. Ghost Sniffers, which does incorporate that element of paranormal hunting, that worked for handheld. But a lot of stuff doesn't. An action, yes. An action genre show probably would. All right, so let's go back. So a tripod, I would easily say as important as your camera. And again, you're going to want that pan and tilt head. It's not difficult to find, but just don't pick up a standard point and shoot meant for photography tripod. It's not going to do what you want it to do in the end. Now let's talk about transitions. Transitions happen in post-production. They happen in your video editing software. Transitions create effects between shots that you have filmed. The fade that you saw earlier was a transition. It's not done with the camera, it's done in post-production. And it's a very standard option. It's found in pretty much all video editing software. But there are other kinds of transitions too. Things that are fun, silly, but can also be used for dramatic effect. I'm sure you've seen some television shows that use silly transitions, such as a world turning or an explosion or a dinosaur running across the screen. And these are adult shows, but they know that humor is making their show better. I personally don't rely too heavily on transitions because I believe that they can take away from the realism of something. But if you're going for a series that has a light heart, that can be silly and poke fun at itself, not unlike Ghost Sniffers, then I think transitions can be really fun to use and entertaining for the viewer. One thing to keep in mind is just like with colors and symbols, seasons, weather, and everything else, use transitions that truly fit with your story. Don't use them just to use them. Don't use them as filler. Make them be thematically tied to the episode in some way. That makes it seem like all the pieces of the puzzle
There was an episode of Ghost Sniffers where I wanted to follow 3 characters walking down a high school hallway lined with lockers. Well, actually, I didn't want to follow them. I wanted to have them walking toward me. In order to get this effect, I would need to have a dolly, a cart that the cameraman stands on that moves along, always keeping a bit in front of the actors. Well, the space where I was shooting really was a high school, and the space was definitely borrowed, not built. So there was no way that I could install a track, and I didn't have the budget for any kind of dolly. So in the old school tradition, a wheelchair worked perfectly. Everyone was amazed by the complexity of the tracking shot, and it worked great, as long as the actors weren't walking too fast or I wasn't moving back too slowly. You might honestly want to consider adding a wheelchair to one of the pieces of your equipment, like your tripod, and editing software that allows you a decent variety of transitions. Those simple tools will make your camera into something more, something that, despite perhaps having a small budget, you can still use to create incredible stories. Think about your story now. What colors, symbols, weather, season, and what angles, what approaches to these shots will best fit your series? What will help you bring out the emotional depth of your series? What kind of lighting? Will it be light, very bright, colorful, very well lit, white light? Will there be a lot of shadows allowing you to perhaps do more stunt work, make maybe a low budget makeup effect look pretty high class? Use the tools and the angles, the approaches that you need that fit with your series. Whatever will bring out the emotional depth that you want, evoke the audience's emotion in the way that you desire, is what you want to do. There is no throwaway shot in a web series. There simply isn't. Nothing is filler. Everything is the meat, and that's what you want. Every single image can stand alone, like a painting on the wall. And this ends Class 6.